The door behind me sealed with a heavy metallic click, and I knew there was no going back. I am Daniel Marsh, and until that moment, I thought I understood what fear looked like. I had seen it on the faces of new recruits before their first zero-gravity drop. I had seen it in the eyes of pilots before a live fire drill. But I had never seen fear look the way it looked on Instructor Vantic Cor's face, right before he smiled. He was not afraid. He was pleased. Vantic Cor belonged to the Threll, one of the oldest species in the Coalition, a people who measured worth in claws, teeth, and the number of species that bowed their heads when a Threll walked past. Humans did not bow. Humans had never bowed, not once, not to anyone, and that fact alone made us a curiosity worth breaking in Vantic's classroom. The room was called Chamber 7, a bare gray box with reinforced walls and one thick door that had just slid shut behind 12 cadets from 6 different species. We were here for something called Cooperative Response Training, a course that sounded harmless on a datapad and felt like anything but harmless once you were standing inside it. I sat in the 3rd row, my hands flat on the cold metal desk in front of me, trying to look like I belonged there. To my left sat Grace Bennett, another human cadet, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed straight ahead. To my right was an empty seat. That seat did not stay empty for long. Vantic tapped a control on his wrist unit, and a side panel in the wall slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Every head in the room turned toward the sound. Out stepped a young Karathi. I had read about the Karathi before arriving at the Ashgate War Academy. Every cadet had. They were an apex species from a world with twin suns and no natural predators above them, a species built entirely around dominance, speed, and instinct. Adult Karathi stood taller than most humans, with dense muscle beneath dark-plated skin, retractable claws, and a low, constant awareness of everything around them, like a held breath that never released. This one was young. A pup, still growing into its frame, still awkward in the way its limbs moved, but its eyes were sharp and alert in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. Its name, according to the datapad Vantic held, was Score. Score's gaze swept the room once, twice, and then locked onto the empty seat beside me. Vantic's smile widened. "Cadet Marsh," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room, "you will have company today." I did not answer. I had learned early that in Vantic's classroom, silence was often the safest response. Score moved down the aisle with slow, deliberate steps, each one placed like it mattered, like the pup was measuring the distance between us with more than just its eyes. When it reached the empty seat, it did not sit immediately. It stood beside me instead, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from its body, close enough that I could hear the low rhythm of its breathing. I kept my hands flat on the desk. I did not look up. Around the room, I could hear the other cadets shifting in their seats. Grace's breathing had gone shallow beside me. Even Owen Hale, 3 rows back, a cadet from a species known for calm nerves, had gone completely still. Everyone understood what was happening, even if nobody said it out loud. Vantic walked to the front of the room and rested one clawed hand on the edge of his desk. "Today's lesson," he said, "concerns the biology of instinct. Specifically, the instinctive responses of prey species when placed in proximity to natural predators." He let the word prey hang in the air like smoke. "Humans," he continued, "have long claimed to be an exception to this rule. They claim resilience. They claim composure. Today, we will observe whether that claim holds any weight, or whether it collapses the moment true instinct is introduced into the equation." Score finally sat down beside me. The chair was slightly too small for a growing Karathi frame, and the pup shifted, adjusting, its shoulder brushing mine for just a moment before pulling back. I felt every muscle in my body want to flinch, want to lean away, want to do exactly what 12 sets of eyes expected me to do. I did not move. Score's head turned toward me, slow and deliberate, and its eyes, a deep amber color flecked with darker rings, studied my face the way a scientist studies a sample under glass. I could see the pup's nostrils flare slightly, drawing in air, reading whatever chemical signals my body might be putting out. I kept my breathing even, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow and steady, the way I had been trained to do before every high-stress simulation since my first year at the academy. A low sound rumbled from somewhere deep in Score's chest. Not loud, not aggressive, not yet. Just a test, a low-frequency vibration meant to see if it could rattle something loose in me. I did not rattle. Vantic noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes flicked toward us, narrowing slightly, the smile on his face tightening just a fraction, as though the opening notes of his performance had not gone quite the way he expected. "Interesting," he said, mostly to himself, though the words carried in the quiet room. Score leaned closer. I felt the warmth of its breath against the side of my face, felt the faint vibration of another low growl building in its throat. This was the moment, I understood, when every other species in this classroom would have looked away, would have shifted their body weight back, would have given some small unconscious signal that said, "I am smaller than you, I am softer than you, I yield." I turned my head instead, and I looked directly into Score's eyes. I do not know exactly what made me do it. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was every hour of training that told me panic solves nothing and stillness solves everything. Maybe it was simply that, after everything I had already survived to reach this academy, a growling teenager with sharp teeth did not frighten me the way Vantic wanted it to. Score went still. The growl in its throat faded into silence. Its amber eyes searched my face for a long moment, confusion flickering somewhere behind them, as if I had responded to a question in a language it had never expected me to understand. Around the room, the silence stretched thin and taut, like a wire pulled almost to its breaking point. Vantic's clawed fingers drummed once against the edge of his desk, a small, sharp sound in the quiet. "Cadet Marsh," he said slowly, "do you understand the purpose of this exercise?" "I believe so, sir," I said, keeping my voice level. "Then perhaps you would care to explain it to the class." His tone carried an edge now, something colder beneath the polished performance of a teacher delivering a lesson. I chose my next words carefully. "You want to see if I flinch." A ripple of tension moved through the room, the kind that comes when someone says a true thing out loud in a place where true things are usually left unspoken. Vantic's eyes narrowed further, and for just a moment, the smile slipped from his face entirely. It returned quickly, but I had seen it slip, and I understood that I had just cost him something small in front of his class. Beside me, Score had not moved. The pup was watching me now, with an entirely different kind of attention, something less like a predator studying prey, and more like a puzzle studying its own missing piece. Vantic straightened, smoothing the moment back into his control. "We will continue," he said. "Cadet Score, proceed with the proximity assessment as instructed." Score's ears, small and rounded against the sides of its head, flicked slightly at the command. For the first time since entering the room, the pup hesitated. It was a small hesitation, barely noticeable unless you were sitting close enough to feel it, the way I was. But I felt it, and I understood, even then, in that sealed gray room with 12 nervous cadets and one very satisfied instructor, that something had already gone differently than anyone standing at the front of that classroom had planned. Vantic did not seem to notice, or chose not to. He turned back toward the room and began speaking again about instinct, about prey responses, about the long history of species who had entered rooms like this one and left them changed. I stopped listening to the details of his lecture. My attention had narrowed to the space beside me, to the pup who was supposed to make me flinch and had instead gone quiet and watchful, its amber eyes drifting back toward me every few seconds like it was checking whether I was still there, still steady, still the same strange, unmoved thing it had expected to unravel. The sealed door at the back of the room remained shut. Nobody was leaving Chamber 7 until Vantic decided the lesson was finished. I only wished, in that moment, that I understood exactly what lesson was actually unfolding, or how far Vantik intended to push it before he was satisfied. Vantik gave a small nod toward Score, and the pup's shoulders rolled back, its posture shifting into something more deliberate. I recognized the change immediately. This was no longer a test running on instinct alone. This was Score following instructions. The pup turned its body fully toward me, angling its knees so they nearly touched mine, closing the last small gap of space between us. In the animal world Score came from, this kind of closeness meant only one thing. It meant a challenge. It meant someone had decided to see who would yield first. I kept my hands flat on the desk and did not lean away. A low sound built again in Score's throat, deeper this time, rougher, carrying more weight behind it than the first test had. I felt the vibration of it in the air between us, felt it in the desk beneath my palms. Beside me, Grace Bennett's chair creaked as she shifted her weight, angling herself subtly away from the sound, even though it was not directed at her. I did not shift. Score's amber eyes fixed on mine, unblinking, the pupils narrowing to thin vertical lines, the way I had read Karathi eyes did when their focus sharpened into something singular. This was the stare that, according to every briefing document I had studied before arriving at the academy, was designed to communicate exactly one message across every species that had ever encountered a Karathi in the wild. Look away, back down, accept your place. I held the stare instead. Seconds stretched into something that felt much longer than seconds. My heart was beating faster than I wanted it to, faster than I would have liked Vantik to notice, but I kept my breathing slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth, refusing to let my pulse show on my face. Score blinked first. It was small, almost nothing, a half-second flutter of the pup's eyelids before it caught itself and forced its eyes back open, wide and searching, as if checking whether I had noticed the slip. I had noticed. I said nothing. At the front of the room, Vantik's tail flicked once against the floor, a sharp, irritated motion I recognized from previous lectures as a sign of impatience. "Cadet Score," he said, his voice carrying an edge of command now instead of instruction. "Escalate." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Score's ears flattened slightly against its skull, a gesture I could not read with certainty, though something in the pup's posture suggested reluctance rather than eagerness. Still, it obeyed. It rose halfway out of its seat, bringing its face level with mine, close enough now that I could see the fine texture of the plating along its jaw, close enough to feel the warmth of its breath against my skin. A low growl rolled out of its chest, longer this time, rising and falling like a wave gathering strength before it broke. Around the room, I heard sharp intakes of breath from several of the other cadets. Owen Hale's chair scraped slightly against the floor as he leaned back. Even the alien students, species accustomed to Karathi behavior from their own homeworlds, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not a gentle classroom demonstration anymore. This was something closer to a live test of nerve, performed in front of an audience that had no choice but to watch. I kept my hands flat on the desk. I kept my breathing even. I did not look away from Score's eyes, even as every instinct buried somewhere beneath my training screamed at me to create distance, to make myself smaller, to do anything other than sit perfectly still in front of a growling predator twice my strength. Something strange happened then, something I would spend a long time afterward trying to fully understand. Score's growl faltered. It did not stop entirely, but the rhythm of it broke, stuttering the way a machine stutters when its gears catch on something unexpected. The pup's amber eyes, still fixed on mine, seemed to lose some of their sharp focus, replaced instead by something closer to confusion, or perhaps uncertainty. It was as though the pup had reached the final step of a well-rehearsed sequence, a sequence that should have ended with me flinching, looking away, offering some small unconscious signal of surrender, and instead had found nothing there to react to at all. Vantik noticed the falter immediately. His eyes narrowed, and this time the frustration in his expression was not hidden behind any polished smile. Continue, he said, sharper now. Score's throat worked. Another growl building, but it came out thinner than the last, less certain. The pup leaned in further, its shoulder nearly brushing my chest, its head tilting slightly, almost as though it were trying to understand something rather than dominate it. I felt the warmth of its breath against my collar, felt the faint tremor running through its frame, and for the first time since it had sat down beside me, I realized the tremor was not aggression at all. It was something closer to strain, the pup's own body working against instructions it seemed to be struggling to follow. I did not move. I did not speak. I only breathed, slow and steady, the same rhythm I had held since the moment the door sealed behind us. Score's growl died away completely. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound could have. 12 cadets sat frozen in their seats, watching a scene none of us had a script for. Vantik stood at the front of the room, his tail no longer flicking, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something sharper, something that looked almost like anger. "Cadet Score," he said, his voice dropping low, "explain your hesitation." Score did not answer immediately. The pup's eyes remained fixed on mine, searching, and for a moment I thought I saw something shift behind them, some small crack in whatever wall of instinct had been built and reinforced across its short life. Its nostrils flared once more, drawing in a slow breath, and this time I understood exactly what it was doing. It was not testing me anymore. It was trying to understand me. "I do not know," Score said finally, its voice younger sounding than I expected, rougher around the edges, uncertain in a way that made several of the alien cadets in the room exchange quick, startled glances. "The response is not occurring." "Then attempt a different approach," Vantik said, his tone clipped, controlled in the way people sound when they are trying very hard not to show how frustrated they truly are. "Physical proximity assertion. Full protocol." I felt my stomach tighten at the phrase, unfamiliar as it was, though the meaning became clear soon enough. Score rose fully out of its seat this time, standing to its full height beside me, taller than any human cadet in the room by a significant margin, its shadow falling across the desk in front of me. It placed one clawed hand flat on the surface of my desk, close enough to my own hands that I could feel the faint chill radiating from its plated skin. The room had gone utterly silent. Even Vantik seemed to be holding his breath now, waiting to see whether this final escalation would finally produce the reaction he had been so certain of from the very beginning. I looked up at Score, meeting its eyes without flinching, and I said the only thing that felt true in that moment. "You do not want to do this." It was not a challenge, it was not defiance, it was simply an observation, quiet and certain. The same tone I might use to point out that the sky outside the Academy dome had turned a particular shade of orange before a storm. Score went completely still. Its hand remained flat on the desk, but the tension in its arm eased, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. Its amber eyes, still locked on mine, seemed to search my face for something, some explanation, some reason why the world was not behaving the way it had been taught the world should behave. "How do you know what I want?" it said quietly, so quietly that I doubted anyone beyond our immediate row could hear it clearly. I did not have a perfect answer for that. I only had the truth, as I understood it in that moment. "Because you have not hurt me," I said. "And you have had every chance." Something passed across Score's face then, something too complicated to fully name, a flicker of recognition, of relief, of confusion, all tangled together at once. Its hand slid back off the desk, retreating, the claws curling inward instead of remaining extended. At the front of the room, Vantik's composure finally cracked, in full view of the class. "Cadet Score," he said, his voice rising now, sharper, colder, "you will complete the protocol as instructed." Score's ears flattened again, but this time the gesture read clearly, even to me. It was not confusion anymore, it was refusal. "I do not wish to continue the protocol," Score said, and the words landed in the sealed room like something breaking, something Vantik had never once considered as a possible outcome when he smiled and sealed the door behind 12 cadets that morning. I sat very still beside the pup, my hands still flat on the desk, my heart still beating faster than I wanted it to, and I understood, with a growing certainty that settled somewhere deep in my chest, that whatever Vantik had planned for this lesson had already slipped entirely out of his control. For a long moment, nobody in Chamber 7 moved. Vantik stood frozen at the front of the room, his tail no longer flicking, his clawed hands gripping the edge of his desk hard enough that the metal creaked faintly under the pressure. 12 cadets sat watching a scene that none of the Academy's training manuals had prepared any of us to witness. Score lowered itself slowly back into the seat beside me, its earlier posture of challenge completely gone. Instead of angling away, the pup leaned inward, its shoulder settling against mine with a kind of quiet weight, the way a much younger creature might lean against something it had decided, against all training, to trust. I did not pull away. Grace Bennett, sitting on my other side, gave me a look I could not fully read, somewhere between disbelief and concern. Owen Hale, 3 rows back, had gone very quiet, his eyes fixed on the pup, pressed against my shoulder, as though he were watching a law of nature quietly rewrite itself in front of him. Vantik's composure returned in pieces, stitched back together with visible effort. "This is a temporary anomaly," he announced to the room, his voice pitched to carry authority it no longer fully possessed. "Juvenile Korathi occasionally misfire their dominance instinct during early development. It happens rarely, but it happens. It proves nothing about the subject species." Nobody in the room answered him, though I noticed several of the alien cadets exchange glances that suggested they were not entirely convinced by his explanation. Score's head turned slightly, its amber eyes flicking toward Vantik and then back toward me, and I felt the pup's body tense against my shoulder, not with aggression this time, but with something closer to wariness, the same wariness a smaller animal shows toward a larger one it does not fully trust. Vantik noticed the reaction too, and his expression shifted into something colder, something calculating. "If the standard protocol will not produce results," he said slowly, "then perhaps a genuine variable will succeed where a controlled one has failed." The words settled over the room like a drop in temperature. I felt my stomach tighten. Beside me, Score's ears flattened again, this time in a way that read clearly as alarm rather than confusion. Vantik moved to a panel set into the wall beside his desk, one I had not paid much attention to when we first entered the room. He entered a sequence of commands, his claws tapping quickly against the surface, and somewhere beneath the floor of Chamber 7, a low mechanical hum began to build. "What is he doing?" Grace whispered beside me, barely audible. I did not answer, because I did not know, not yet, though the tightening feeling in my chest told me it would not be something simple. A section of the far wall slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow chamber behind it, dimly lit, empty except for a faint shimmer of heat rising from vents along its floor. Vantik studied the readout on his wrist unit and gave a short, satisfied nod. "This room," he said, addressing the class again, though his eyes kept drifting toward me and Score, "is equipped with an environmental stress module designed to simulate emergency conditions during containment scenarios. A controlled release of heat and reduced oxygen, calibrated well within safety limits of course, but sufficient to trigger genuine survival instinct in any organism present." I felt the air in the room shift, subtly at first, a faint warmth creeping in through the open wall panel, carrying with it a thinner, harder edge to each breath I drew. "Sir," Owen Hale said from the back of the room, his voice carrying an edge of alarm he did not try to hide, "is this within Academy safety protocol?" "It is within my authority as instructor of this course," Vantik said, without turning to look at him, "and it will demonstrate, once and for all, whether the subject species possesses any true survival instinct beneath its apparent calm." The warmth in the room continued to build, slow but steady, and I felt sweat begin to form along my hairline despite the effort I made to keep my breathing controlled. Beside me, Score shifted uncomfortably, its plated skin clearly registering the temperature change far more acutely than my own body did. The pup's breathing had quickened, its chest rising and falling faster than before, and I realized with a jolt of clarity that whatever safety limits Vantik claimed existed, the young Karathi beside me did not appear entirely convinced of them either. "Instructor," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could manage, "this exercise is putting a minor at risk." Vantik's eyes snapped toward me, sharp and cold. "The exercise is putting a minor through a standard developmental assessment, Cadet Marsh. I would advise you to remain in your seat and allow the lesson to proceed." I did not remain silent, though I did remain in my seat, because standing without a plan would have accomplished nothing beyond drawing more of Vantik's attention onto Score. "The pup's breathing rate has already changed," I said. "That is not a developmental response. That is distress." "You are not qualified to make that assessment," Vantik snapped, though the edge in his voice suggested my words had landed closer to a nerve than he wanted to admit. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, and the warmth in the room climbed another degree, thick enough now that I could see a faint shimmer rising from the vents along the far wall. Several of the alien cadets in the room had begun to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their own species evidently sensitive to the change in atmosphere as well, though none of them seemed to be struggling the way Score was. Score's hand found the edge of my sleeve, gripping it lightly, the claws carefully retracted so as not to tear the fabric, a gesture so unlike anything a predator pup should have offered a prey species that for a moment I simply sat there, absorbing the strangeness of it, before closing my own hand gently over the pup's. "Stay steady," I said quietly, meant only for Score, though I suspected at least a few others nearby heard it as well. "Breathe slow, in through your nose, count to 4, hold, then let it out slow." Score's amber eyes flicked toward me, wide and uncertain, but the pup obeyed, drawing in a slow breath through its nostrils, holding it, releasing it in a long, shaking exhale. I felt the tension in its grip on my sleeve ease slightly, though the room around us continued to grow warmer, the air continued to grow thinner, and the low mechanical hum beneath the floor continued climbing toward whatever threshold Vantik had set for this exercise. Grace Bennett leaned toward me, her voice low and urgent. "Daniel, this isn't safe. That readout on the wall panel is climbing faster than it should." I glanced toward the panel Vantik had used to activate the module, and though I was no engineer, even I could see the numbers scrolling across it were rising in a pattern that looked less like a calibrated demonstration and more like a system that had either been poorly configured or was beginning to slip beyond its intended limits. "Instructor," I said, raising my voice enough to carry across the room, "the readout on the control panel does not match a stable environment. I believe the module may be malfunctioning." Vantik's eyes flicked toward the panel, and for just a moment I saw something flash across his expression that had not been there before. Not confidence, not command, something closer to concern, quickly buried beneath a mask of authority. "The system is functioning within acceptable parameters," he said, though his claws moved toward the panel with a speed that suggested otherwise. The hum beneath the floor stuttered, then surged, and the temperature in Chamber 7 climbed sharply enough that several cadets gasped audibly, their hands rising to loosen collars or fan at their faces. The air felt heavier now, harder to draw fully into my lungs, and beside me, Score's grip on my sleeve tightened again, its breathing growing ragged despite the counting rhythm I had tried to teach it only moments before. "Sir," Owen Hale called out again, his voice sharper now, edged with genuine fear rather than simple protest. "Something is wrong with the module." Vantik's claws moved rapidly across the control panel, his composure slipping further with each passing second, and the sequence of commands he entered produced no visible change in the readout, climbing steadily upward on the display beside him. "It is not responding to the shutdown command," he said, more to himself than to the room, though every cadet present heard the words clearly enough. The sealed door at the back of the room remained shut, the same door that had clicked closed behind us at the very start of the lesson, the same door Vantik had locked with such quiet satisfaction only a short while earlier, confident that whatever happened inside Chamber 7 would happen entirely on his terms. I looked at that door now, then at the rising numbers on the wall panel, then at the young Karathi pressed against my side, its breathing growing shallower with every passing moment, and I understood, with a clarity that cut straight through the rising heat and thinning air, that whatever lesson Vantik had intended to teach in this room had just become something far more dangerous than either of us had expected when the door first sealed shut behind us. "Everyone listen to me," I said, rising slowly from my seat, keeping my movements calm and deliberate so as not to startle Score further. "We need to find the manual override for that door, and we need to find it now." Vantik's head snapped toward me, and for the first time since I had entered Chamber 7 that morning, the instructor's face no longer carried even a trace of his earlier smile. "Sit down, Cadet Marsh," he said, though the command carried none of the weight it had held only minutes earlier. "The system will correct itself." "The system is not correcting itself," I said. "Look at the panel." The numbers on the display had climbed past the marks Vantik himself had pointed to earlier as safety limits, and the shimmer of heat rising from the vents along the far wall had thickened into something almost visible, distorting the air above it like the surface of water. Several cadets had begun coughing, the thinning oxygen finally catching up with lungs, unused to the strain. I turned toward Grace Bennett. "Check the main door, see if there's a manual release beneath the panel housing." She nodded, already moving, her training kicking in faster than her fear could catch up to her. Owen Hale joined her a moment later, the two of them working at the edges of the sealed door, searching for any seam or access point that might offer a way out that did not depend on Vantik's failing controls. Beside me, Score had risen unsteadily to its feet, one clawed hand still gripping the edge of my sleeve, its breathing coming in short, uneven pulls. The heat clearly affected the pup more severely than it affected most of the room, its plated skin darkening slightly at the edges, a sign I did not like the look of at all. "Score," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to stay close to me and keep your breathing slow, the way we practiced." "Can you do that?" The pup's amber eyes found mine, wide and frightened, in a way that had nothing to do with instinct or protocol anymore, simply the plain, honest fear of a young creature caught somewhere it did not choose to be. It nodded, a small human gesture that looked strange on its unfamiliar frame, and drew in a slow breath through its nostrils, holding it, releasing it the way I had shown it only minutes before. "Good," I said. "Stay with me." Across the room, one of the other alien cadets, a slender being from a species called the Ilvex, had begun swaying in her seat, her breathing shallow and rapid, clearly struggling more than most with the thinning air. I moved toward her quickly, Score staying close behind me, and helped her lower herself gently to the floor, where the air, though still thin, seemed marginally cooler and easier to draw. "Keep your head down and breathe slow," I told her. "Help is coming." I was not entirely certain that was true, but panic would help no one in that room, least of all a cadet already struggling to stay conscious. Vantik remained at the control panel, his claws working frantically now, entering command after command that produced no visible change in the climbing readout. Whatever confidence he had carried into Chamber 7 that morning had entirely drained from his posture, replaced by something that looked, for the first time, uncomfortably close to fear. "The override sequence is not responding," he admitted, his voice tight. "The module's primary control has been locked out." "Locked out by what?" I asked, moving toward the panel myself, though I had no formal training in this particular system. "I do not know," Vantik said, and for the first time since I had met him, I believed he was telling the truth. Grace called out from the back of the room. "There's a manual release here, but it needs a physical key code entry, not just a control panel command." "Then enter it," I said. "I don't have the code," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's instructor-level access only." Every eye in the room turned toward Vantik. He hesitated only a moment before moving quickly toward the door, his claws working at a small hidden panel Grace had uncovered near its base. His hands, usually so precise and controlled, fumbled slightly against the keys, the heat and thinning air clearly affecting even his own composure now. "It is not accepting the code," he said, a note of genuine alarm entering his voice for the first time. "The lockout has affected the door release as well." The room had grown noticeably hotter in the last several minutes, the shimmer above the floor vents thickening into something that stung faintly at the eyes, and more than one cadet had begun coughing steadily, their bodies straining against air that no longer carried enough oxygen to satisfy them comfortably. I thought quickly, running through everything I had learned in my years at the academy, searching for anything that might apply to a sealed room, a malfunctioning environmental system, and no clear way out through conventional means. "The vents," I said suddenly. "If the heat and thin air are being pumped in through the floor vents, there has to be a source line somewhere, feeding this room specifically. If we can't shut off the module itself, maybe we can block the supply line at the vent." Vantik turned toward me, his expression caught somewhere between doubt and desperation. "That would require accessing the vent housing directly, and the metal grates are fused to the floor plating." "Do you have anything in this room that could pry metal?" I asked, already moving toward the nearest floor vent, where the shimmer of heat rose thickest. Score, still close beside me, looked down at its own hands, at the claws it had kept carefully retracted throughout the entire lesson, and without waiting for permission, extended them fully for the first time since entering Chamber 7. "I can do it," the pup said, kneeling quickly beside the vent, its claws finding purchase at the edge of the fused grate. "Careful," I said, kneeling beside it, adding my own weight and strength to help pry at the opposite edge of the metal plate. "Slow and steady, don't force it too fast, or you'll cut yourself on the edge." Together, we worked at the grate, the heat rising sharply against our faces as we pulled it loose, revealing a narrow duct behind it, warm air rushing out in a steady, forceful stream. Score's claws, sharp enough to cut through far tougher material than academy floor plating, sliced quickly through a section of insulating material nearby, and working together, we managed to wedge it firmly into the mouth of the duct, muffling the flow of heated air enough that I felt an immediate, if modest, easing in the temperature around us. "It's working," Grace called from across the room, her eyes on a secondary readout near the door. The rate of increase just dropped. "Find the other vents," I said, already moving toward the next one, Score close behind me, its earlier fear replaced now by something sharper, more focused, a kind of purposeful energy that reminded me suddenly of exactly what the Karathi were meant to be capable of when their strength was pointed toward protection instead of dominance. Owen Hale joined us at the second vent, and together the four of us worked quickly, prying grates loose, packing insulation and torn fabric from our own uniforms into the openings, doing whatever we could with the limited materials available to slow the flow of heated, thinning air into the room. Vantik, to his credit, had abandoned the malfunctioning control panel and moved to help directly, his greater strength useful in prying loose a particularly stubborn grate near the back corner of the room. Whatever authority or superiority he had walked into Chamber 7 believing in that morning, none of it seemed to matter now, not with the air growing thinner, and every cadet in the room, human and alien alike, working together toward the same simple goal of staying alive long enough for help to arrive. "The door," Grace called out again. "I think if we combine the manual release with a hard reset on the code panel, we might be able to force it open. But I'll need another set of hands holding the release lever steady while I run the reset." "I'll do it," Score said immediately, moving toward her without hesitation, its earlier trembling fear entirely gone now, replaced by a steady, determined focus that looked, in that moment, remarkably like courage. I moved to help brace the release lever alongside the pup, our shoulders pressed together as we held steady while Grace worked quickly at the small keypad, her fingers flying across a sequence of commands, sweat running freely down her face from both effort and the lingering heat still clinging to the room's air. "Almost there," she said. "Just hold it steady a few more seconds." Score's grip on the lever did not waver, its claws digging carefully into the metal without damaging it, its full attention fixed on the task in front of it, rather than any lingering trace of the instincts Vantik had spent the entire lesson trying to provoke. A sharp mechanical clunk echoed through the room, followed immediately by the hiss of a door releasing from its seal. The heavy door slid open at last, cool air from the corridor beyond rushing into Chamber 7 in a welcome flood, and several cadets near the front of the room let out audible sounds of relief as fresher air finally reached their straining lungs. "Everyone out, slowly," I called, helping the ill-vexed cadet from the floor and guiding her toward the open door, Score moving quickly to help support Owen Hale, who had begun coughing badly in the last few minutes of heat and thin air. Vantik remained near the back of the room a moment longer than the rest of us, staring at the malfunctioning control panel, at the readout that continued climbing uselessly now that the vents had been sealed and the door stood open, his expression unreadable in a way I had never seen on him before. I paused at the doorway, looking back at him. "Instructor," I said, "you should come out as well." He looked up at me then, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something in his eyes that was not superiority, was not command, was not the polished performance of a species convinced of its own natural place above all others. It looked, simply, like a person who had just watched everything he believed turn out to be wrong. Medical staff arrived within minutes of the corridor alarm being triggered, moving quickly through Chamber 7 with scanning equipment and oxygen support, checking each cadet in turn. The ill-vexed student was given priority treatment for oxygen deprivation, though her vital signs steadied quickly once she was clear of the room's thinning air. Owen Hale's cough eased within the hour, and Grace Bennett, though exhausted, waved off the medical team with a tired but genuine smile once they confirmed she was stable. Score sat beside me in the corridor outside Chamber 7, wrapped in a thermal blanket someone from the medical team had draped over its shoulders, though the pup barely seemed to notice the fabric at all. Its amber eyes remained fixed on me, watchful in a way that no longer carried any trace of the testing, evaluating gaze it had first turned on me when it sat down beside me that morning. "You are not injured," Score said, more of a statement than a question, though I understood it as its own kind of question all the same. "No," I said. "Thanks to you." The pup's ears flicked in a gesture I had come to recognize, over the course of that long, strange morning, as something close to embarrassment. "I did not do much." "You pulled a fused grate off a floor vent with your bare hands," I said. "You held a release lever steady, while Grace reset the door code. I would call that considerably more than not much." Score did not answer immediately, though its shoulder pressed lightly against mine again, the same quiet gesture of trust it had first offered in the middle of a lesson designed to prove that trust between our two species was impossible. Academy administrators arrived not long after the medical team, moving with the particular brisk efficiency of officials who understood that a serious incident had occurred and intended to determine exactly how and why. Vantik was escorted separately, his earlier composure entirely gone, replaced by a stiff, controlled silence that told me everything I needed to know about how seriously the situation was being treated. I was called in for questioning within the hour, along with Grace, Owen, and several of the other cadets who had been present in Chamber 7. A senior administrator named Director Halbrook, a calm, weathered woman with sharp eyes and no patience for excuses, listened carefully as each of us described what had happened, occasionally referencing data pulled directly from the room's own control systems, which had apparently recorded far more than Vantik had likely intended. "The environmental module," Director Halbrook said, reviewing a datapad in front of her, "was activated well beyond any authorized threshold for a standard training exercise. According to these logs, Instructor Vantik overrode 3 separate safety warnings before the system reached the point of malfunction. He was trying to force a reaction, I said. He wanted to prove that humans would panic the same way every other prey species does when placed near a predator. When it didn't happen the way he expected, he escalated. Director Halbrook's eyes flicked toward me, studying my face for a long moment. And the Karathi cadet, Score, what was his behavior throughout the exercise? I thought carefully before answering, choosing my words with the same care I had used throughout that entire long morning. He was following instructions he clearly didn't want to follow. When the room became dangerous, he didn't hesitate. He helped everyone in that room, myself included, get out safely. Whatever instinct Instructor Vantik was trying to provoke, I don't think it exists the way he assumed it would. Director Halbrook made a note on her datapad, her expression unreadable, though something in the set of her shoulders suggested she had already reached conclusions of her own well before our conversation began. The investigation into Instructor Vantik Corps concluded within the week. I was not present for the formal proceedings, but word moved quickly through the academy, the way it always does, and by the time the details reached me secondhand, it was clear that Vantik's career as an instructor at Ashgate had come to an abrupt and final end. The specifics of his reassignment were never shared with the cadet body directly, though I noticed his name quietly removed from the course roster within days, and a new instructor, a quiet, methodical being from a species I had not encountered before, took over cooperative response training the following term. Score remained enrolled at the academy, though something had visibly shifted in how the pup carried itself in the weeks that followed. Where it had once moved through the corridors with the careful, controlled posture of a young Karathi still learning to project the dominance expected of its species, it now walked more easily, more naturally, often finding its way to wherever I happened to be between classes, settling nearby without any particular explanation needed between us. "You do not have to keep following me around the academy," I told it once, several weeks later, as we sat together in the mess hall during a quiet afternoon between classes. "I am aware of that," Score said, its amber eyes carrying none of the sharp, evaluating focus they once had, replaced instead by something calmer, steadier. "I am choosing to." I did not push the matter further, because I understood, by then, that whatever bond had formed between us in that sealed, overheated room was not something either of us fully controlled or fully understood, only something we had both, in our own ways, chosen to accept. Word of what happened in Chamber 7 spread through the academy far faster and far wider than either Score or I expected. Cadets from other courses began asking Grace and Owen for details, embellishing certain parts in the retelling, though the core of the story remained largely accurate no matter how many times it passed from one cadet to another. Humans do not panic the way predator species expect. A Karathi pup chose loyalty over instinct. An instructor's careful lesson collapsed entirely under the weight of his own arrogance. Other instructors at the academy, I noticed, began treating human cadets with a subtle but unmistakable shift in attitude, less certain now of assumptions that had gone largely unquestioned before that morning. I did not think the shift would last forever, or that it would spread evenly across every species within the coalition, but I understood that something small and important had changed, at least within the walls of Ashgate. Months later, during a joint field exercise involving several cadet units, I found myself paired again with Score, now grown noticeably larger and steadier in its bearing, though its amber eyes still carried that same familiar warmth whenever they turned toward me. "Do you remember?" Score asked, as we waited together for the exercise to begin, the first day, in the sealed room. "I remember," I said. "I was supposed to make you afraid," it said, "and instead, I learned something I did not expect to learn." "What was that?" I asked. Score considered the question for a long moment, its gaze drifting toward the training field spread out before us, cadets from a dozen different species moving into position under a pale morning sky. "That strength is not only measured by what a creature can do to another, it said finally. Sometimes it is measured by what a creature chooses not to do, and by what it chooses to protect instead. I did not have a better answer than that, so I offered none, and we simply sat together in comfortable silence, waiting for the exercise to begin, two very different kinds of creatures who had somehow, against every expectation built into that sealed room months earlier, found something neither of us had been looking for. The coalition, in its long history, had built entire systems of understanding around the idea that dominance and instinct defined the natural order between species. Predators ruled, prey yielded. It was a simple, ancient logic, tested across countless worlds and countless generations, rarely questioned by anyone who had grown up trusting it completely. Humans, it seemed, had simply never received that particular lesson, and worse still, from the perspective of species like the Threll, who built entire careers around proving otherwise, humans appeared entirely capable of teaching that same unsettling lesson to others. I thought about Vantik sometimes, wherever his reassignment had taken him, and wondered whether he ever fully understood what had actually happened in that sealed room, or whether he simply filed it away as an unfortunate malfunction, an anomaly best forgotten. I preferred to think of it differently. I preferred to remember the exact moment Score's growl had faltered into silence, the exact moment a predator pup, raised entirely on instinct and expectation, had chosen instead to lean quietly against something it did not fully understand, simply because that something had refused to give it any reason to be afraid. It was not a large moment. In the grand scheme of the Coalition's long and complicated history, it was one sealed room, one lesson gone wrong, one instructor's smirk fading into silence. But sometimes, I had come to understand, the largest changes in how species see one another begin exactly that quietly, in rooms nobody expects to matter, between individuals nobody expects to change, until one day the door opens again, and everyone inside walks out having learned something the room was never designed to teach.